Moved all my junk over here. Call to order this meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee.
You had your Wheaties this morning.
In the microphone. We've got a very full agenda, so we're just going to quickly run through introductions, starting with the assembly members that are here. Mr. Rivera.
Felix Rivera.
Meg Zolotow.
Randy Solt.
Suzanne LaFrance.
Pete Peterson.
Christopher Constant.
Forrest Dunbar. And on the phone,
Jamie Allard.
Austin Quinn Davidson.
okay, that's everyone. All right, we're going to jump right into it, and we'll do the admin introductions as we get to their items on the agenda. So the Budget Advisory Commission chair is currently in Washington, D.C. doing policy work, as the BAC members do. And so she sent us an email last night. Is Mr. Clouda here or anyone else from the Budget Advisory Commission? Okay, so I'll just read her points from Ms. Brawley. The BAC met on Thursday, the 8th. They discussed but did not take action on a resolution regarding 2022-75S, the property tax exemption ordinance. They might continue discussing it because, of course, it's going on the ballot in April, so there still is an opportunity for the BAC to weigh in. Their members are currently going forward with the department conversations, and for those that aren't aware, the BAC typically assigns different departments that each of the BAC members reviews and works with and specializes in. They got an overview because they have new members from the OMB, and let's see. And they're just starting to talk. They learn how to read the budget. Now they're going to start to talk about the budget. They, of course, have the 120-day memo. And finally, so we confirmed Carmela Warfield last night. So they temporarily had 11 members, but Mr. Rob Forbes submitted his resignation, or at least sent an email indicating that he was resigning. Okay, that's all from the BAC. And again, we thank them for their work. So I would like to make, or if someone could make for me, a resolution, a motion to change the order of the day to take up 4B and 4C at this time.
So moved. Second.
Thank you. Is there any opposition to doing so? Those are the draft resolutions that my co-chair, Ms. Quinn Davidson, and I have been working on that we hope to have before the body on the 27th. Is there any opposition to changing the order of the day? Okay, hearing none, we will, if everybody wants to pull those out, I will briefly describe them. So we have had a variety of funding issues brought before this body over the last month or so, actually even a little bit longer than that. For example, the Polynesian community, 2 organizations would like to receive ARPA funding. We also have heard from the administration that there are shortfalls in the fuel budget. There is a request to put repair dollars towards the Sullivan Arena. There is an urgent need that I agree with to increase the towing contract for APD to remove junk vehicles. And then we also heard from the Korean community, and a small grant is in here for them as well. Now, the way these two resolutions would work, and I want to thank Ms. Camacho for putting them together. $1 million of ARPA funds was dedicated towards beetle kill mitigation. Mr. Constant has identified federal matching grants that can potentially double the amount of money that we put towards this program. But as everyone knows, you cannot match federal to federal. You can't take one grant and match it to another federal grant. So we are taking the beetle kill mitigation program out of the ARPA program. And instead, we are funding it with what we believe $1 million from the additional funding we received from the basically just from the general fund. We've heard from the administration that there was additional rental car money that came in that we were not expecting, and that there was additional money from the state that was not built in the 2023 budget, the community assistance grant. And so we are moving the beetle kill, $1 million in beetle kill funding to that program, so that funding source, so that hopefully we can double the funds there. That frees up $1 million of ARPA funding. We have only, in these resolutions, designated 350,000 of that, 250,000 to the Pacific Community of Alaska and 100,000 to the Polynesian Association of Alaska. So there are potentially $650,000 if we do this of ARPA funds that we can all continue to fight over. Or more positively, that we can find another very deserving recipient for. And then the remainder of the items I discussed, we haven't gotten a very concrete estimate from the administration on what exactly these things cost. There was talk of the fuel overrun. I think the initial request was for $3 or maybe $3.5 million, but fuel costs have decreased significantly since then, and we haven't received any updated numbers. So in the general funds, we have $2 million here for that purpose. We also, to my knowledge, haven't received a detailed breakdown of what the Sullivan Arena repairs will cost. And so we have designated for that $1.75 million. We also have $300,000 for the police department and $50,000 for the Korean Association, Korean Community of Anchorage, who presented here. I had a chance to speak with Ms. Zolotel about whether or not we should use alcohol tax funds for that. To me, it seems easier and cleaner to use these kind of general funds. So with that, I think I wanted to do this so we have a conversation about it here, and also can hear from the administration. Do they have? This is just a draft form. If we don't think that the fuel costs are going to be $2 million, then let's reduce that number. If we think the Sullivan is going to be more, we'd love to get that data as well. So we'll start with Ms. Zolotel and then Mr. Sult.
Thank you. So first, thanks to the Budget and Finance and Ms. Camacho for pulling these together. I really appreciate it. On the Sullivan repairs, I have a couple of questions. One is, I heard reports that the Wolverines were starting hockey there in October. So if that's the case, what is the timing of the repairs? Because if the timing of the repairs is set further out in order to accommodate that, then I would actually be wondering why we wouldn't just be looking at a facilities bond, and why we would be appropriating these funds now. I don't know if there's urgency. So that's one of my questions. And then with respect to the Polynesian Association of Alaska, I'm glad you included it here for the ARPA request. Is there any intention here to supplant any possible efforts to use alcohol tax for ongoing support for that similar education? We identified substance misuse and one other form of education that fit within the alcohol tax. I'm sorry, I blanked.
Was it vaccines? I mean, I know they've done that work before.
No, it was substance misuse and mental health. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I can only speak for myself. I'm not intending to supplant anything. And if there is a process, whereby that association could also get alcohol tax funds, I think that's great. This is a source of funds we know we have, and we know that we can distribute relatively quickly. Can the administration speak to, is there anyone from the administration here that can speak to the Sullivan? Or repairs to the Sullivan?
Courtney Peterson, Office of Management and Budget. I can't specifically speak to whether or not the Wolverines start their season or when they start. My understanding was they weren't going to be in the Sullivan. We have an RFP out on the street right now for an operator at the Sullivan. So that may, bring in some nuances to as far as what they have planned as the operations and everything. So without an operator there, I'm not sure we wholly know that yet, but I'll follow up with Public Works to make sure.
Yeah, I should say, again, this is the initial first draft. We can't pass this until this 27th of September. So I'm hoping that we can all do some more data gathering to refine these numbers by the 27th. And perhaps it's the case that the Sullivan Arena doesn't require these kind of funds. And if that's the case, then that's a fine answer from the administration. Mr. Sult?
Thank you, through the chair. So I have heard rumors Wolverines and UAA are looking to get to the Sullivan, so maybe some confirmation there. Also, to address the repairs, there was an ARPA request made by the administration that I think it was 2.5 million, and then it does list out, I remember chiller and some other items in there, but I can't say, I can't say if it's that valid. It lists a couple bullet points, but not, I think, the detail you're looking for. So
Yeah, I think we'd all like to loop back with that. And if the Sullivan can be operated without those $2.5 million of repairs, then that is, that's a new data point for us.
yeah, there's probably, immediate needs to get it open and then other items that can take their time. So
Yeah. And Ms. Zolotel makes a good point too. The ARPA funds do not have to, or these aren't ARPA funds anymore. These are general funds from our fund balance. This doesn't have to be the source. In fact, more typically, I think for these kind of things, we would do a facilities bond. I think the intent was to put money forward quickly because we thought we needed that quick infusion to get Sullivan operating. But then the longer term repairs are more appropriate for a facility bond, as Ms. Zolotel indicated. And so it's an interesting data point that perhaps the Sullivan is going to be open and operating even without these funds, in which case I would not be opposed to removing these here and putting them towards a facility bond. And we have Mr. Constant.
Yeah, thank you. In the light of some of the things we learned on Tuesday about how construction projects are proceeding relating to their authorizations, I am asking for 3 specific things: timing, scope, and cost of repairs for Sullivan Arena.
Okay.
In advance of a yes vote from me on any appropriation for those. And I support bringing those facilities back, but I don't support a blank check. I want the timing, the cost, and the scope.
Yeah, and I think it's also an important question that my colleagues have just raised now. Which of these repairs are needed immediately because there's some activity that just cannot function versus something that could be delayed until next summer, for example, for the longer term health of the facility. I think if there was some way to ask that question as well, that would be great. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I believe I saw a newspaper article recently that said that the Wolverines are opening up on the road and they will be back for a home game. I believe it was October 21st was their first scheduled home game. So that's like 5 weeks from now. Thank you.
Okay. And it was at the Sullivan, not the Ben Boki.
It didn't say where.
Okay. Miss Quinn Davidson is on the phone.
Yeah, just briefly, I think between the time I asked to be in the queue and now, a lot of my points were raised by you and Mr. Constant. But guess just to express a little bit of frustration that here we are again, that, the fuels issue was taken to the media as a dramatic, desperately needed item, but we still haven't gotten any information on what you need appropriated. And with the Sullivan issues, no details whatsoever. So just another request to the administration that to please work collaboratively with us. At the last meeting, Ms. Peterson said she'd be providing the information about the fuels, and Sullivan and we have yet to get it. So just a little frustrating. And I guess I would ask Ms. Peterson to respond to that. What is the plan and when are they actually going to get us this information?
Thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. And Ms. Peterson, I'm sorry, I don't know if I actually went to you directly on the fuels question. So I know you don't have the Sullivan information. Do you have updated fuels numbers for us?
I do. So during the ARPA request, there was $3.7 million and some change in there that was requested. The details were on the spreadsheet that were provided with the project by department. I verified with the departments on those numbers, and there were some departments that came in with some changes. In total right now, based on the department's projections for year end, we're looking at $2,713,454. And I can give you that breakdown by department if you would like.
It's two.
Yep, 2,713,454.
Can you describe a little bit about why that number changed from 3.7 to 2.7?
The largest change came from the transit department, and that was based on the reduction of the price of fuel between April and now, and then also the opportunity for grant funds.
Oh, okay.
So, they have some FTA funds that they can utilize for operational activities. And so they were able to kind of work around with those funds to be able to accommodate.
Okay. All right, good. That's good data. So the price of gas has been falling pretty precipitously. It continues to fall. Is that 2.7 number a projection, or is that based? I'm sorry. Does that take into account the idea that gas will continue to fall in price, or is it sort of based on today's price or whatever price it was when the departments made their estimations?
Yes, it's based on the expected price of like right now continuing and not dropping much further than what it is right now, just because it's hard to project if it's going to drop what it would actually drop by.
Yeah. Okay. Ms. Zolotel?
Yeah, thank you. To follow up on Mr. Dunbar's question, so we're already kind of in the hole on fuels. Why wouldn't we just dig ourselves out of the hole and then take this up at like first quarter budget revisions, whatever we end up in through the end of the year? I mean, this isn't something where we're not going to be able to buy fuel. We've proven that we can continue to buy fuel, and then we would have the actual numbers, of what it costs. What is the overrun? Things overrun sometimes. Here we know of one to date that is fairly large, and we have the ability to pay it. And then the question becomes, why don't we just do it at 1Q when we have the budget to actuals at that time? So it's an alternate route. What is the current debt on fuel versus the projection, I guess would be my question. Like, how much is the difference?
So each one of the departments that are listed and that were listed on the ARPA have already exceeded the fuel budget that they were given for the year. And so basically they're 100% spent in fuel right now, and they would just continue to dig into that.
That's not the question. I'm sorry. And can you turn your microphone on?
It is.
It is? Okay. It's just not lit up. Okay. So yes. So if they're 100% spent, then what is the amount that they are overspent as of today versus what they were budgeted? That's what I'm trying to get. What are we already in debt for with regard to fuel versus what we project being in debt for with regard to fuel?
Okay.
Thanks.
And I don't have that off the top of my head. I will go back and request that. So I believe that as of July was when the majority, or actually all of them, had hit that 100%. So it would be from now until then in that what you're considering debt piece. And so I'll go back and get those pieces for you.
So, Ms. Peterson, you said that you had that $2.7 million breakdown. Trying to look at the document. Can we make sure that is emailed to the folks that are on the phone, or has it been, Ms. Camacho?
No, I didn't provide that to Desiree.
Okay, can we provide that electronically so the folks on the phone can get it as well?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And yeah. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Mr. Solt.
So real quick, looking at your budget actuals on the sheet, it shows, again, if a straight line, 66% of the year. The departments that are having fuel issues, fire, police, transportation, they all show being under that 66% spend, I believe. Maybe we're close to it. So I guess my question is the fuel a straight line item, or is it going to vary winter to summer? And do you expect to see heavier fuel usage as we head into the winter going to the end of the fiscal year? Yeah.
I would have to ask each department individually, about their operations. I'm not familiar necessarily with the nuances of all of them. I would expect that for police, it's probably a straight line, just based on their response. I would probably say that for maintenance and operations, theirs is probably more of a curve, because you're going to have the winter plowing coming up. And so you're going to see a significant increase in their expenses towards the end of the year for those things. And the other departments I would have to follow up with. I don't know if fire has some type of rotation when they fill up, or how that works. So, yep.
Okay. Are there any other questions or points on these draft resolutions? I think based on the data here, I'll have a conversation with my co-sponsor, but I don't see a pressing need to change any of these amounts. for the 27th. I think my preference would be in the time between now and then, after we submit this, that we'll get potential suggested amendments from my colleagues or from the administration. And yeah, $2.7 million and $2 million isn't totally out of the same realm. And I think Ms. Zolotel makes a good point too, that we don't have to appropriate this money now. I guess I see it as a little bit of an act of good faith because we had this request for $3 million, $3.7 million a month ago, and we did not fund it. And our vehicles continue to move with gasoline in them. And now we are coming back and hopefully providing some funds. Okay, with that, I'm going to move on, Ms. Zolotel, and then I'm going to move on to the next topic.
Just a process question. Is this intended to be introduced and voted on in the same meeting because it's an AR, or is
Yes.
it a, yes. Okay, thanks.
I don't see a reason why we wouldn't, unless folks feel really strongly that this needs to be set for public hearing. But I think Yeah.
No, I wasn't suggesting that. I'm just worried about getting the information in time to be in that spot. That's what I was thinking through. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Zolotel. Is there any other comments from the administration on these two ARs?
No, I will follow up on those questions and get you guys those answers. And I think that it would require 2 meetings just because of the dollar value.
It's a reappropriation.
The ARPA, but not the general government. Sorry.
Okay.
No, that one.
Yeah, the ARPA is a grant, but the general government, I think, would require 2 meetings.
Okay,
Just
that's fine.
That's true.
More time to get some precision. I guess the other would be to, Ms. Peterson, if you have the chance to get a more refined number from the APD on the towing, I think that would also be useful.
actually, you guys did a very good job on that one. I verified with them, and it is 300,000. So that 300 would sufficiently cover the towing for them.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Constant.
Thank you. So I think that since there's a reappropriation, one of them, it's not a public hearing item. You have in one resolution all 3 items. I might suggest one other way would be to take the funds for the Polynesian Association and the Pacific Community and put them into a separate resolution. And let's just pass those and get them the money because of the need. And then let's take the $1 million for the fire department and do it as a separate resolution that does get set for public hearing because it exceeds the amount required for a public hearing, but it won't drag the other awardees into delay. And so I would offer that I think that's the most expeditious manner to help out those organizations.
Let's have a conversation, you, me, and a co-sponsor, and Ms. Quinn Davidson and Ms. Camacho after offline between now and the 27th. That's, yeah, we'll talk about that. All right, so moving forward, we have D, update on workers' compensation claims. Is there anyone from the administration to present on that? So I think some background on that is that we had heard reports and there was some email traffic that there had been a fairly significant jump in workmen's compensation claims this year versus last year. And we wanted to understand why. Sarah. Okay. That one might not have gotten briefed to the admin as much as I would have liked. My fault on that. Okay. Is Mr. Hess here? Okay. So let's move on then to 4E, the funding source from the Chief Equity Officer. And Mr. Hess, if you could come forward, please. And this is based on a memo that we received from the Ombudsman's office. Please.
Good afternoon. I'm Daryl Hess, the Municipal Ombudsman. Last month, I had an individual contact the Ombudsman's office. They were looking to find out where they could get a copy of the annual report that's required by the charter regarding collection and expenditures of alcohol tax revenues. And while we were doing our research and looking at documents related to that inquiry, another constituent contacted our office questioning if it was appropriate for the chief equity officer position to be 100% funded using alcohol tax revenues. I looked at the 2022 budget documents. I looked at the ballot initiative, the code, the section of charter related to the alcohol tax, and reviewed the job description for the chief equity officer. And I determined that it was inappropriate to use, in my opinion, to use alcohol tax revenue to pay for the position. Especially it's under the money which is dedicated to, let me pull it up. Administration, collection, and audits to the municipality. And really the intent of that money is that it go to the finance department to fund administration, collection, and audit of the program. And it really seems inappropriate. I don't think it complies with the intent of the charter amendment or the intent of the voters to fund a department director. You know, when I look at the job description for the chief equity officer, they have nothing to do with administering, collecting or auditing the alcohol tax revenue. I reached out to the administration at the same time that I reached out to Mr. Dunbar and Ms. Quinn Davidson as the co-chairs of the Budget and Finance Committee. The administration contacted OMB, and OMB, I believe, has requested that legal look at this. I think the administration also has concerns about the funding source for the position.
Thank you, Mr. Hess. And I'll just note that we also received a legal opinion from the Assembly attorney, and they concurred with Mr. Hess's conclusions, and as do I, and I believe my co-chair as well, that perhaps, you know, when the equity officer position was created almost exactly the same time as the alcohol tax, and there was a certain vision for what it might do, and 50% of it was funded by alcohol tax funds. As that position has changed, and now, of course, is changed through litigation as well, it seems completely divorced from auditing the alcohol tax funds. So Ms. Quinn Davidson, I'm sorry, Ms. Zolotel, and then I'd actually like to hear from Ms. Peterson if possible.
Thank you. So I have a question for the ombudsman. Would there be this, is it more related to the position, or if there was an intent to make sure that the alcohol tax was being administered with equity in mind, would that be okay? I'm looking for that, maybe a little more nuance. Is it the position as it is, or, because I mean, building equity into the alcohol tax is a really good thing. And so I'm wondering if there's still the opportunity to do that work.
So then the question would be, what percentage of the position is dedicated to that effort? And I doubt it would be 100%.
So this is only 50% of the.
No, it's 100%. It's $196,000.
Okay, I didn't realize it. I'm sorry, my fault on not catching that it had been changed to 100%. Previously, it had been put in as 50%. So it would have to be a percentage equivalency.
I would say there has to be a direct correlation between the work that the chief equity officer would be doing that's relative to collection or administration or auditing of the alcohol tax money. Potentially, it seems like it might fit under other areas of the alcohol tax expenditures, but
Okay, fair enough. I put you on the spot.
Yeah, it's difficult. I just don't see, looking at the job description for the position, I don't see anything related to ensuring equity in the collection or the expenditures of alcohol tax revenues.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hess. I'll just say that I am very interested in ensuring that there's more equity and access in the expenditure and how to determine who receives alcohol tax funding. It was a key piece to our health policy committee and something we want to continue to explore. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Alto. So my question for Ms. Peterson is the administration has received this memo from the ombudsman as you're building the budget this year, the 2023 budget. Are you planning to use a different fund source for the chief equity officer?
So to answer your question, Mr. Hess did reach out and asked for the information regarding the chief equity officer. We responded to him and how that was established originally at the 50%, and then during the 2021 revised budget process at 100% from the prior administration. So from there, he did express the concerns with a couple of items that were in there, the chief equity officer, and then a couple of the other amendments in which we're working with the legal department, to review all of those things. So as we do look through 2023, we are looking at whether or not those things should continue being funded under there or another funding source, or as we talked about, would it be just a matter of reflecting those costs maybe in one of these other segments? So if it is more appropriate for it to be described as the homeless, mental health and substance abuse, or somewhere in the sexual assault and domestic violence sections where, as Ms. Olatel said, that, it's the equity of the distribution of funds in those areas and not necessarily the administration of the funds. And so those are ongoing conversations with the legal department on whether or not that kind of nuance exists, or if it's just more appropriate to have that position funded through general government and not in the alcohol tax at all. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Constant?
Thank you. I think it's quite an arguable statement that the so-called chief equity officer is in fact working on equity issues at all. We have a presentation coming before us at a work session on the affirmative action plan that should be delivered by the chief equity officer, but the chief equity officer instead is going out to events, shaking hands, maybe doing some job fairs, but not doing the work that we established that position to do. Now, it was already stated that we did lose a lawsuit. We can't direct the work of that individual, but there's no claim in the world that you can show me evidence that our chief equity officer is doing the work of equity. And so any argument that the alcohol tax funds could be used to help that office help us understand better the equitable outcomes and inputs and outputs of our alcohol tax, it's just not based in reality. And so I look forward when we have our work session on affirmative action plan, the chief equity officer coming in and helping us understand how it works. But as I've seen, it's not that individual in that office doing that work. It's other people in the municipality who are actually doing that work. And we should hear from those who are doing the work and have an actual understanding of it. So to tie that all back together, it's a strong disservice to the issues of equity to have somebody who doesn't perform the actions of equity be funded under the name of that. And so I appreciate the work that the chief equity officer is doing, but it's certainly not the work that we set out, and it's certainly not the work in the job description, and it's certainly not the work that was intended to be funded through that budget. And so close scrutiny of this question is important.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Constant. Ms. Allard was in the queue, but she says that Courtney answered the question, so good. Does anyone else want to speak? Mr. Rivera.
Thanks. So I think most of my colleagues made the points that I wanted to make, but just to reiterate, I think, in my opinion, if the chief equity officer were operating in the vision that I think this body and the prior administration had for this position, then I do think we wouldn't be facing this issue right now, at least not to the degree that we're facing it. So definitely looking forward to seeing if we can get this position back on track, perhaps in a future administration. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. And I'll just note before we conclude here that the sort of narrow question before us is not whether or not the chief equity officer is going to be funded. I think that I certainly feel that the position should be funded. It's just the ombudsman has laid out, I think, a pretty compelling case that the work that is currently being done by the chief equity officer doesn't sort of line up with the alcohol tax as the people of Anchorage put it into the charter. And so hoping that the administration finds another funding source, probably the general fund, for that position. Okay. With that, I'm sorry. Miss Allard, you're in the queue.
Thank you. I have a question in regards to what was requested of the prior chief equity officer, Mr. Clifford, in regards to what was his actual accomplishments to set the bar for our current equity officer. Just trying to figure out, and I'm requesting the job description currently. I am not convinced that Junior is not performing his duties. I'm trying to figure out how we can compare the current chief equity officer's duties to someone who never reported to us, never gave us updates, and never set a bar or a standard. So I'm looking forward to seeing that job description, and of course we would share it amongst fellow assembly members. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Allard. Ms. Zolotel, and then I'd really like to move on if that's okay.
Thank
I
you.
have a
I would
question
just
for the ombudsman.
like to remind the members that when Mr. Armstrong was in the position, he sent us a scope of work very early on as to the work he intended to perform in that position. I believe we should all be in our emails, but we could certainly elevate that scope of work again to see how he intended to go about the job. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Constant.
Thank you. And I will say that he was terminated the day before he was delivering a final report on the performance of this municipality towards its goals of equity. And that report was buried by the administration, not allowed to see the light of day. And there has been and will always be questions. What is the administration hiding about the municipality's performance on questions of equity that they would fire a man and bury his report? Because without that report seeing the light of day, you could impute on that anything you want. You don't have to come at that with goodwill. You can come at that with they're actually trying to hide something. And so bring that report, bring that draft report up to the administration, the chief equity officer, show us that draft, finalize that draft. That's the work. Shaking hands in the community is great, but let us know how we're hiring people. Let us know how we're recruiting people. Let us know why we are continuing not to hire equitably in our community. That's the stuff that we created this position to help us out with.
Okay. Thank you, Mr.
Mr.
Constant.
Dunbar, may I just do a follow-up really quick? It's
Yeah,
simple and
I would
quick.
say this was not my intention for this item to have this debate about sort of the substance, but or the underlying position, but rather the funding source. But yeah, go ahead, Ms. Allard.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. I agree with that we do need to get to the bottom of all this with the chief equity officer, but I will also just make a quick statement that myself and Ms. Kennedy had requested to have information from Mr. Armstrong, and we just never received it during that time. In fact, we requested it on 2 separate occasions. We just could not meet with him. He was either unavailable or not around. So I don't want to throw daggers or darts at anybody. Mr. Armstrong is no longer with the administration. I want to respect that and his privacy. Thank you, Mr. Dunbar.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Allard. So we're going to move on now to the update on FEMA reimbursement. And I think that will probably have to be you, Mr. Thurn. I don't believe Mr. Riswald is available today.
Correct. Thank you, Chairman Dunbar. You should all have the current monthly report for FEMA, and we actually have a few things to talk about this month compared to last month. I'll just kind of hit the highlights here. In the monthly obligated change, you will see that we did get 3 projects obligated, of which the biggest one was our first project that we submitted 2.5 years ago. So that was a major victory for us to be able to bring that $6,085,000 in addition to us. So we did have 3 projects that got obligated, and we were reimbursed from the state on 2 of those for a little over $200,000. So it was nice to be able to see some movement both with FEMA and the state. The second project PW 157, which is the second row for $5.5 million, that is going to be obligated any day. I'm almost guaranteeing 100% that you will see it next month's report, but it is through everything. It's just in its embargo period right now. So that $5.5 million will bring our obligation to a little over 60 million. So it would take us about halfway there compared to what we've spent so far. So we're doing pretty good on that. In addition to that, we've made it a priority for the month of September to move a substantial number of our projects that have been in the not yet submitted category above the line and into the top. So 2 projects have currently been moved, and we're going to move 7 more by the end of the month. So when you see next month's report, I would expect to see a significant number of those projects and the dollar amount that's been submitted to FEMA to be significantly more than what it is. We will probably have to create some additional smaller projects to finish out some of the miscellaneous charges that we've either been holding or we haven't quite got the documentation yet. But we're really truly trying to get to that, as close to that 118 that's currently been documented into the FEMA's hands as quickly as possible. And you're going to see some significant movement in next month's report with those projects moving to the top. We have expressed to the state our goal of getting reimbursed for a couple of those projects that have been obligated before the end of the year to try to bring that money into our finances prior to this 12/31. We'll see how successful we are, but they are having their continued backlog, but we have expressed to them. So it's actually been a pretty good month. Projects got obligated. We got another big one ready to be obligated. We're moving projects into FEMA, and we're actively trying to continue to get what's been obligated reimbursed to the municipality. So I'll just kind of stop right there. But I think it's been a good month, and we're on good track here over the next month as well.
Wonderful. Mr. Solt and then Mr. Constant.
Yeah, so I guess great job. I mean, you guys are doing a fantastic job. Kind of the question that I've asked and eventually want to know and may not know for 2 years is what is ultimately going to be denied or not reimbursable? And I'd say based on your track record, it looks like it's probably going to be less than 5% when this is all said and done, if even that high. So again, whenever that starts to materialize, I'd appreciate knowing what's not going to be submitted or not going to be reimbursed.
So through the chair, Mr. Soul, you will never see me commit to a number publicly of what we're not going to get. We will submit all of our reimbursements to FEMA for eligibility review. That there is not going to be an expenditure that's not going to be submitted. Are there some potential expenditures in there that might be difficult? Most likely there are, but I'm not going to commit to a number. There's a lot of what ifs. There's also multiple appeal processes and so forth and so forth that go on there. Absolutely, every project that they obligate gives me a lot more comfort that project and the expenditures in that project are good. I don't know if you noticed this, but I try to categorize. We've had to do multiple projects with the same time and scope. So if you look the first 3 lines there, those are the exact same project, but we had to do it in 3 chunks. So when I see the first one of those get obligated, that gives me very good confidence that the second one and the third one will be obligated as well, because they've already reviewed that. When we get into a couple of our other areas where we have not obligated, for example, that 4th line item, I have a little bit more, I'm waiting to see what FEMA ultimately does before I have more confidence, but we will submit them all. Our goal is to get the non-labor items, non-forced labor submitted to FEMA by the end of the year. So that we'll get closer to that 123 current number, and then work on forced labor at the first part of next year, which I believe is going to be eligible as well. But you're going to see a lot more projects, unfortunately, that are going to be tinier, that we're going to be very targeted in the expenditures that go in there, because we have endeavored through this entire process. If there are expenditures that are challenging, we do not want them to hold up items that we believe are going to be eligible. So we've been pulling those back, and we're going to put those in individual ones where they don't hold up anything else, but that we also still go forward. And we will ask for a formal determination memo on every single project that potentially they have concerns about. But I'm not going to ever say a number
ever, that of what we're not going to get.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Salt, Mr. Thurn. Mr. Constant.
Thank you. A couple questions. One is follow up to that. What have they rejected so far, or have they come back and said, no, this isn't allowed? And do we have that number somewhere?
So through the chair, Mr. Constant, it's the way I've been running it. They have not denied anything yet, because on challenged expenditures, we have pulled those out of our projects that we've submitted in the past so as not to convolute and hold those up. And then I'm going to be putting those into a separate one. So not one item has been formally denied by FEMA, because we've made the intention to pull those questionable ones out so as not to hold up the rest of those projects.
So with your previous statement that you aren't going to ever put out a number because that will constantly change and you're trying to diminish that number to as close to zero as possible, is there any way you can give us a sense of the rate of pull you're having to draw out of submitted proposals? Is it large? Is it massive? Is it moderate? What's your assessment of the number of items that are being put into that second bucket?
I think, and there'll be more than one second bucket, but
Right.
I believe the number of transactions will be relatively a high number, but the dollar amount of those transactions are not going to be too significant.
Is that said like an auditor? Like significant is, I don't know. Anyway, you don't have to answer. We can talk about that maybe offline. But that's a curious question. Like, what's that rate and how do we get there? So
This process has been going for 2.5 years, so I have a pretty good idea what some of the items are that FEMA is having some issues with.
Yep.
So I have a number in my head, obviously,
Right.
about what I anticipate, but we should never be out there, because this is a public meeting, and state and FEMA reps are always watching. They always read the newspaper on comments that are made by assembly and administration. You should always realize there are people out there who are evaluating these projects who have access to all these public comments. And any of those comments could sway their opinion of those projects and ultimately whether we get reimbursed. And so I try to act accordingly as well. But you will see between October and December a variety of smaller projects that I'm intentionally putting those into specific categories to try not to put them with the ones that I've already submitted.
right. But my key takeaway there is not that big. That's, I think, the measure that you left us with is that pool of projects that isn't falling into the reimbursable or obligated or reimbursed is not that big after they've been reviewed. And so I'm going to stick with that, and I'm going to tell people that, because that matches with the reality that I've been seeing related to this work, and it's good work you're doing. So thank you. But that wasn't my question. I actually have a question for what's not on the books here. That was just sparked off of Mr. Salt's very astute and important question. And but the question that I have that is being asked is, how are we on the earthquake reimbursements? What's the status? How much remains? And you may not be able to answer that for us today, but it might be good information to share with us. What's been reimbursed or expected to be reimbursed? This is kind of similar, but 3 years prior.
Well, through the chair, Mr. Constant, I do run earthquake as well, so I do have a pretty good idea of that. All of the earthquake projects were obligated or have been obligated, all 106 of them, and even up to a year and a half ago. So all of those projects have been looked at and approved by FEMA from an obligation standpoint. 2 of those projects got other grants from other areas, so they're not going to be reimbursed. So we really have 104 of those projects, and all are obligated, but it's a little bit different than the way COVID works. As the expenditures came in, we created projects and we tried to get reimbursed. Earthquake, you have to be finished with the completion of the project in order to be reimbursed. So we've been doing pretty well, and we can, if that's something we want more numbers, I can bring the spread. I have a separate spreadsheet for earthquake we can bring next month if that's something of concern. But we've, off the top of my head, we've been reimbursed approximately 19 million already from FEMA through 66 projects. The big project is the solid waste service building. That's 13 million. We did get an advance payment of that one of 3 million. 4 of our 10 applicants are completely finished. All their projects are done and so forth. So we're left with 6. But there are definitely projects earthquake related that are not finished for completion. So ultimately, we cannot get fully reimbursed for those. But on the other side, all of our expenditures haven't been spent on them as well. So as those projects go, except for solid waste services, we normally wait until the project is finished and then we seek reimbursement for that particular piece. So we do, if you remember, we also have the MOA piece and we have the utility piece, AWU and MLP. MLP is 100% done because we wanted to get that done prior to the sale, and AWU has its own separate piece. But I do keep track of every project that's out there, what we've been reimbursed for and so forth. But it does take a little while longer because it's up to us to, one, complete the projects, whatever that construction needed to be, and then do all the paperwork to seek reimbursement for those.
So final question, I assume you didn't mention ASD, so they have their own controls over that.
ASD is a separate thing, even though they're running their own FEMA reimbursement and we have nothing to do with them.
Yeah, because theirs was substantial.
2 large schools. And so we only had 2 buildings that were red tagged, the dump station and the old fire station 11 in Eagle River. And I think if you drove by there, you'd still see the old one there. So that project hasn't even begun to be demolished and redone. So I would expect several years before all 104 earthquake related projects are completed, spent and obligated and reimbursed to us. But the FEMA portion of it is completely done because every single one of those was an approved project.
Thank you. So I realized I actually missed, I changed the order of the day and then we didn't go back to the order we should have. So my fault. We're going to take up now item 3A, the update on the alcohol tax program, which was under unfinished business. And I think we have some new
Chair?
documents. Oh, yes.
Go ahead, Jamie.
Ms. Allard?
I apologize. I don't have your number, and I've been sending my cue to Ms. Quinn Davidson. I just had a real quick question for Mr. Hess, and maybe he could just answer it. He might know just right away.
Mr. Hess is no longer in the room.
Oh, who was just speaking? Was that Mr. Hess?
No, I'm sorry, that's Mr. Thurn about FEMA. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can I ask Mr. Thurn a question?
Yes. Go ahead.
Okay. Mr. Thurn, you said there was 140 earthquake projects that we were working on for reimbursement. Could you, or maybe not reimbursement, but 140, could you tell me how many of those are in Eagle River, please? Chugach Eagle River? Do you know offhand?
Through the chair, Ms. Allard, it's 104, so 104, not 140.
Oh, thank you.
I can't tell you exactly. I can tell you all of the Eagle River roads were obligated and have been reimbursed. All of the road projects were Eagle River related, so that was 100%, about $6.5 million. The buildings and so forth, some of the buildings out there, Eagle River Town Center, the ice rink and beach lake things have been completed and paid. But the 2 biggest projects of the entire earthquake are the old fire station 11 and the dump administration building. Those 2 projects both are still in process and have a long ways to go. But I don't have all of them, but a significant amount of Eagle River work has definitely been done and completed so far.
Thank you, Mr. Thurn. I think you might have thank you for that information, but I think you might have misunderstood my question. Can you tell me of the 104, not which ones have been obligated and completed, but how many of those were located in Eagle River, Chugach?
Through the chair, Ms. Allard, I'd have to go back and look at all 104 of those projects in order to be able to come up with that number. And
Okay.
if that's something that would be desired, we can certainly do that.
Yes, please. I'm in the middle of something in regards to GAC, and that would be very useful information. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Thurn.
Thank you, Ms. Allard. So now we will go to our continuing discussion on the alcohol tax program. It looks like we have a new document here from you, Ms. Peterson, or 2 new documents, perhaps.
The document dated August 18th, 2022 Budget and Finance Committee meeting. That is the follow-up questions from the in-depth 2021 year-end actuals and then last month's budget versus actuals for the alcohol tax. So this is a 5-page document. And I think we provided a comprehensive response to the questions that were still pending from that discussion. So
Okay.
that's what that is just the follow-up to those questions.
Thank you. And these were provided digitally as well?
Yes.
Great.
Yep.
Are there any, excuse me, are there any questions for Ms. Peterson regarding this document or the alcohol tax more generally? I guess, Ms. Peterson, is there anything in here that you'd like to really highlight for us?
I think the health department did a good job in identifying the recipients of the grants. I know that was kind of a hot topic, is how much did the grantees receive? Excuse me. They also, the Home for Good / Pay for Success program, that was another one. So they provided a table kind of the distribution of those funds with the appropriations. We also provided, this was again based on last month's budget versus actual. So that was the 2022 evidence-based grants and early education grants, and that distribution as well.
Okay. Are there any questions from my colleagues? Mrs. Alatel.
Thank you. So we dove pretty deep into the alcohol tax at the Health Policy Committee.
Okay.
And so if we look at, these aren't numbered, but let me count it really quick. 1, 2, page 3
Okay.
of the handout
Yep.
around the evidence-based prevention grants. I see like spent year to date, and there's 0 for a lot of these folks. So what we learned at Health Policy was if the grant agreement isn't signed until today, the only funds made available are the prorated amount from today to December, meaning that if the intention of the appropriation, let's say for Abused Women Aid in Crisis, AWAKE, was $125,000, that amount would be divided into a prorated amount and that the remainder would go into fund balance for reappropriation. So I'm a little bit confused. And we kept hearing we needed to come to OMB. So here you are. How do we ensure that we get the full amount out with the intention? Because often when we do dedicated appropriations, there's an idea of how long the spend is for. It's usually a year, kind of as a rule of thumb, because we're talking about things on year cycles. How do we ensure that the full amounts get out and for the time period intended?
Yep. I actually listened to that meeting because we did have this conversation. And so I referenced, so actually there's the table and then there's like 3 questions after that are based on that same topic. And so one of them is that we will be starting that process much earlier. We already have a meeting scheduled for the health department and purchasing to start the RFGP process earlier this fall. So that,
Can we pause right there?
yes.
Because that's going to be my next question. So you've completely set it up. So you want to start the the request for proposals and grants in October, right?
I think that their timeline, again, we don't set the timeline, they do. So I think what they will do is figure out what timing they need. And so that by December, they can have not only by then the actual review of the respondents, but then we'll know the dollar amounts in December because November would have hopefully the budget passed, but they can start the process before the budget is set because they can base it on appropriation. So we do that in construction projects, bonds and things like that, where they go out there and you apply for the funds or you get a bid and it's based on, basically the contingency of appropriation.
Great. I'm glad you brought that up because we could wildly change the allocations in the alcohol tax, meaning we're having organizations and some small organizations go through the machinations of submitting a proposal that very likely may not end up funded. So how is it, is there a solution where it could be that we could actually get through the budget process, see what the buckets are funded to, and have a realistic process where then it could go competitively and still fund programs without having to do this pre-work that may be for naught?
I think it would be a pretty tight window just because the budget doesn't get passed until the end of November, so you don't know what those numbers are until that point. And if you want the grants to start on January 1st, you have 30 days. So that I think is like kind of would be a perfect storm of everything aligning in order for 30-day window to put out the RFGP process, allowing enough time for everyone to compile their responses, then have them back, have them reviewed, and all of that award process. So, just because of the timing of the budget and then when our fiscal year starts, if the expectation is that on January 1 or, basically in that time frame, you're starting to distribute funds or they're aware that they're available to them, it's just a really tight window to say that we're not going to start it a little earlier to make sure that on January 1, we have some funds available or they've been notified that they're getting an award. So I think, I guess it depends. What I've heard is it sounds like the availability of the funds earlier in the year is kind of what everybody wants to see. And so that's kind of the goal that has been worked towards, is getting that done. And so waiting until the budget is passed just isn't conducive to getting that timeline.
Okay, one last question.
Yeah.
Do we resolve any of that if the funding is administered in such a way as if there's a $125,000 grant or whatever the grant amount identified by the assembly is particularly for direct appropriations, that upon execution of the agreement, the full amount goes to the grant recipient? Because we heard that it was actually a reimbursement type-based program. And we also heard that a lot of nonprofits can't afford to front, particularly programmatic dollars, because they're often staff hires.
And I don't know what the reimbursement periods are. I don't know if they're turning in quarterly or monthly, but they are reimbursable. And that was based on when the alcohol tax was implemented and the stakeholders wanting to ensure that the monies are distributed and implemented in the fashion that they were intended for. And so the only way to do that is if we have reporting requirements that are then verified. And so if we give money out and then we say, now come back and report to us, we can't really go back and take money back if they're not really accommodating those reporting requirements or not necessarily spending in the manner in which they were intended. And I'm not saying that's happening, but that's kind of the standard in those grants to ensure that those reporting and performance measures are being met, is that it's a reimbursable. You report and then we verify and then, okay, now here's your reimbursables for the monies that were submitted.
Oh, that opens up a whole nother can of worms, but I will draft some more questions up.
Mr. Constant?
Thank you. And, I think that one way to overcome that would be an allowance of some percentage up front that we could establish as a proper threshold to allow projects to get organized and rolling. And so that is not an unheard of process that happens among grantors and grantees out in the world. So if we could do some blend of the two, where limited or enough to get started plus reports and reimbursements, then all of this conversation sparks to mind that maybe, like, we try to work with the administration on establishing budget priorities for the year starting in July, August, in advance of that 120-day letter, we might want to bake into our process an annual community review and establishment of priorities for alcohol tax grants under those headings, so that we have some ability to drive the overall broader efforts, because the categories that we've established are very broad and could be interpreted in any number of ways. And having an annual review of that process might be very helpful for us to ensure fidelity to the goal. And so it raised a lot of questions to me on how we could do a better job. And this is progress from where we were last month, in the sense that they can land a plane, get it ready to go before the first of the year, and on the first they can have it out. I understand there are issues of applications and challenges, but that might even warrant a pre-application process, some kind of pre-screening that's a simple form that allows you by invitation to do more thorough work. And so there are a lot of ways this could go. I've spent 20 years in grant writing and have a bit of experience. Final question, this idea that those funds that aren't spent return to the general fund, I assume that means to an alcohol tax general fund,
It's not general fund.
right? Okay.
Yeah. The alcohol tax is a specific fund of
Account.
itself.
Yeah, yeah.
And it is not in the general
I
fund.
just want to make sure
Yep.
that was
Yep,
clear.
it is not. And that is, it is similar to the general funds, and that is a fiscal annual fund. And so it runs on the same fiscal year, January 1 to December 31, like the general funds do, but it is not accounted for in the same.
Yeah, that's fine. I just
Yep.
didn't want it to end up in a general pool to spend for gas and other.
Nope,
yeah,
nope,
thanks.
it is specific, separately set aside.
So I would ask for a motion to extend by 10 minutes.
So moved.
Any opposition? Okay, we are extended by 10 minutes. We still have several pretty big items to get through. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Peterson, I know the issue of the language that governs the process for the grants, it either came up in the Health Policy Committee or in the last Budget and Finance Committee. Would you be able to share that specific language, whether it's charter or code, that is being referenced as far as how this process has been created? I mean, like what is the language that is driving this reimbursement process? And I know before you said this was the existing process in place, but I would like to get a better understanding of, exactly what that is. Thanks.
Just specifically to the grants as reimbursements. I don't know that we have a specific charter or code requirement that does that, but it's really more the nature of the reporting and the ability, once you send money out, if those monies need to come back for some reason because the reporting requirements or the performance standards aren't met, or the other things that are kind of requirements of the money, in ensuring that we are distributing to the community and having those programs, running. And so again, I think that's more what drives it, and not necessarily a code or a charter requirement, in just making sure that we have some type of mechanism before we're sending money out, that ensures we are complying with the.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. LaFrance. Yeah, that's enlightening. So there is no charter or code requirement that forces this. The administration has decided this is how they want to administer this. And so you could change it pretty quickly if you wanted to.
The department ultimately is the one that runs the program. And so I think since inception of the alcohol tax, this is the process that has been used as far as I know. I've
Okay.
not, been involved with them changing it also.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Peterson, I was just wondering, in the column, this is a small thing, and maybe this is the best way to reflect it like you have it, but the revised budget shows a total of $16 million down at the bottom. But I recall us passing something like 14. Of course, that was at the objection of the administration who thought it would come in lower, and it's coming in even higher, it appears. And then 19, I assume, adds 2021 fund balance to it. Is that what the supplementals are from?
Yeah, so the 2022 revised budget is what the total budget was passed as. That included the use of some fund balance, and I think that this is in the packet for the responses to questions. There was a question on the fund balance. And so the 2022 revised budget had some assembly amendments that had fund balance established as the funding source. So the revised budget already had use of the fund balance. But I think maybe that's where you're seeing the growth over what you thought the revenue number was, is because that. Yep. So that amount is included with the fund balance use.
Got it. So you're seeing the 2021 revised budget as the amount spent during 2022, because not all of that is from 2022 revenue.
Correct, because some of those amendments
Okay.
were, had identified fund balance as the funding source and not expected revenues. And then the increases, the couple of appropriations that we have had this year that we're using fund balance as well. So the AR 2022-111S approved, and then the AR 2022-221S as amended. Both had the use of fund balance, which then grows the budget.
Got it. That's helpful. And I appreciate you including 2021 just so we can sort of track it as a big picture, which I know you guys are trying to do too. When you do the next iteration of this, which I'm sure will happen at some point, would you mind just separating it so we can tell what's 2022 and what's 2021?
So everything that is on the 2022 alcohol tax budget versus actuals is 2022. It's just that is what the budget is set at. So it's just the funding
Well,
source.
it's 2022 spent,
Yes.
but it's not the 2022 revenue. And so it's confusing to compare against what we approved, if that makes sense.
I'm not, I might not be understanding. So maybe we can take it offline and we can have a discussion
Okay.
about maybe what you're looking for.
Sure, that
Oh,
sounds great. And we're
okay.
running out of time anyway. Quick other question, which is just an update about the mobile crisis team.
Is that a question for Ms. Peterson?
That's the
Mr.
question.
Jackson?
Yeah,
can you
it's been months. I would assume we're about ready. And it said something in the notes about speaking to Department of Law, but I was hoping you could give us an update.
That is where we are right now. It's still an evaluation and, trying to work inside of, where the money exists and where we're seeing the personnel, options are. That's kind of where the constraints are. And so that's why it's kind of a Department of Law situation, is because I am definitely not an attorney. So they are the ones that tell.
And that's fair enough.
Yeah.
Can you tell us who the person is? Because this has now gone on for months, so I think it might be worth reaching out to that person specifically.
Yep, Acting Municipal Attorney Blair Christensen.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. Let's see here. I want to start. Are there anyone, members of the public, who are hoping to participate at the end of this committee meeting? Okay, then we're going to do this content right up until the end, and we won't leave time. We won't leave time
Mr.
at the
Chair.
end. Yes.
Procedurally, I would just say let's move to audience participation and ask if there's anyone that wants to participate.
Okay.
And then since there isn't, we close that and then move back. Then it's official.
Okay, so we're going to jump now to audience participation. Is there anyone who would like to participate? Okay. So then we will move forward. We have 6 minutes left, and I might ask for another motion to extend. But we have 6 minutes to figure out what our financial status is, and our treasury report, and our budget report. So our acting CFO, much to my surprise, Mr. Jack Gadamus.
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair to Dunbar. I believe I'd like to maybe hand it over to Mr. Moore to talk a little bit more in detail about it.
And I'll just let me say, my surprise is not because Mr. Gadamus is not competent to do this job. It's just I didn't know he was acting CFO until he sat down today. Mr. Moore?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. All right, so I'm going to quickly go through the revenue status. We do this once a month. One item that we included as a new item is on the very front page. It's the fourth bullet, and that's basically a summation of all the pluses and minuses. So the current projection, which is going to change every month, is a net positive revenue variance of $7.9 million. That's about $2 million less than what was quoted last month, primarily due to cash pool earnings projection, which is now negative $2.5 million for the year. And then the EMS, which is ambulance services, which is anywhere from $3.5 to $4 million negative for the year. Those are the two big negatives. We did put in the handout all the negatives. We put it in red font, so it sort of pops out. But overall, it's positive. And In the next 2 to 8 weeks, we're going to learn quite a bit more of the near final picture here. The PFD will come out in less than a week, the first batch of that. We do obviously know the exact amount, but we don't know how much our share will be until next week. Personal property will get billed next week. Once that billing roll is created, we'll know what the revenue is related to that. Room tax, rental vehicle tax, those are quarterly taxes. We will not know the results of that until early November. However, I can tell you with room tax, we do know for the largest hotels how this July compared to last July, and it was up 37%. It's extraordinary what's going on in that area. And then cash flow earnings, it's always going to vary every month just based on what the market's doing. So I just have a couple other highlights and then any questions after that. A little bit more on room tax and rental vehicle tax. This is on page 3 of the handout. Just to sort of put this in perspective, right now for room tax, we're at 63% of the budget. Normally at this time of year, we'd be at 41 to 45%. For rental vehicle, we're normally at 33%. We're at 75%. Okay. So those are coming in just extraordinarily strong. And I'd say, based on how it's going, I think the third quarter should be quite good. I will say, just as a side note, too, Airbnb and VRBO, those are hosting platforms. They are more than almost quadruple what they were in 2017 when we began with that. So they are major players in the room rental market. Just so you know, I cannot quote exact numbers. That's not allowed by code, but they are very significant. The only other thing I'll point out, and just as a reminder, it came up at the last meeting, is the motor fuel excise tax. We had projected $1.5 million negative revenue variance. That was due to the higher fuel costs the first half of the year. We have revised that estimate. Instead of $1.5 million negative, it's $1 million negative. And so we just want to point that out. And then in addition, effective January 1st of next year, according to current code, there will be an automatic adjustment based on the trailing 5 years of CPI. When we looked at what the code says, the CPI methodology has actually changed in recent years. Actually, it changed right after that code came into existence. So we have to have a technical correction made to the language in order to sort of back up the calculation. And you're going to see an ordinance on the 27th of September that is purely a technical wording change. The result of all that is our recommendation based on interpretation of the code is a 1 penny increase. Okay. So instead of 10 cents per gallon, it would be 11 cents per gallon. And that is the bare minimum increase that the code would allow. So those are the highlights I have. And I'll just, and just one other side point.
I'm sorry, Dan, I have to interrupt you. Can I get a motion to extend by 10 minutes?
So moved.
And we'll try not to use all of the 10 minutes because I know the audit committee is meeting after this.
Okay. And just one other side point. I have 2 people in the audience, Glenn Cipriano, if he's wearing blue striped shirt, and then next to him is Paula Reiswig. I'm going to be out of town next month for this meeting. So Glenn is the new deputy treasurer. He started August 1st, and he's worked very closely with me on all these revenue issues as well as the trust fund. And so Glenn's going to be sort of the primary speaker next month, and then Paula will be right at his side, for any additional questions. So that's all I have.
Great. Miss Allard, you're in the queue.
Thank you. Just a really quick question. Dan, can you tell me, you said there was a 30% plus increase, and I was wondering, was that before or after the pandemic? What I mean by that is, are we increased 30% now, or was it a 30% based on the numbers before the pandemic?
We are, the 30% is related to what is budgeted for this year. The pre-pandemic 2019 was a banner year. We're going to exceed 2019 quite significantly. So if that helps answer that question.
It does. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay, not seeing any other questions on this topic. Thank you, Mr. Moore. We're going to proceed quickly to Ms. Peterson for our budget to actuals.
All right, and I will try to keep it brief so we can get out of here. There aren't any departments that are over the 5% over that is required for reporting. However, there are 2 departments that are technically over through the fiscal year percentage. That is the Equity and Justice Department, and that is based on a settlement payment that should start to even out, and they don't expect to exceed their budget. The same thing with real estate. That is due to the payments of leases at the beginning of the year. And so the same, as we discussed previously, the same issues in general government of the fuel and the towing obviously are inside of this, but not quite impacting the 5% reportable overage through those departments at this time.
Great. We have Ms. Quinn Davidson in the queue and then Ms. Zolotel.
Great, thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks to Courtney for being here and answering all these questions. We just saw a press release about the mayor's community grants going out, and it looks like the total, sorry, I don't know if Jamie and others are experiencing this, but we hear ourselves talking. There's a feedback and echo, so it's very distracting. Anyway, the total I think was around 300,000. It's so hard to talk. You hear yourself echoing. Thank you, Jamie. Oh, it's gone. Thank you. Whatever you did. So we received, I think we got a press release or something. I can't remember how we received it, but about $300,000 I think was put out in community grants, which is great. If I recall correctly, the Assembly maybe did around 600,000 in the final budget, with 100,000 specifically to arts organizations. So I'd like to know what happened. Is the mayor planning to, and his team, put out grants for the other 300,000? What is the plan for those? And then also if you could speak to who applied, how many applicants you got, and how many recipients out of those applicants there were, that would be great. Thanks.
This is going to be very brief because I do not have those details at this time. And so I will follow up and get you the details on the mayor's grants.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Peterson. Thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. Ms. Zolotel, you are in the queue.
Thank you. So you said that this included the fuel costs. So this is inclusive of the fuel costs or not? I'm sorry.
So this is through August 31st in the spend. So this doesn't include projections. It's just where we were in spend through August 31st.
Okay, so is it fair to say through August 31st, any fuel cost spends did not put anyone's budget out of whack more than 5%, which is kind of that flag we have?
Yes.
Okay, and so when we come back next month, will we be through September?
We possibly could have that, the budget to actuals. I'm trying to think of the timing to see when, part of it is the period closing, and right now we are not waiting for those to happen. But I think that we should be able to have through September. I'm trying to think of when the October meeting is.
I'm sorry. The Assembly meeting or the
Budget and Finance.
It's the 20th.
Oh, yeah, by October
Okay.
20th.
And the reason I ask is it seems that departments are coping and being able to deal with this unexpected fuel cost increase again. So I just really am looking for some context of like how urgent is the issue related to kind of where departments are with their spends. And right now I'm not seeing significant urgency. Thanks.
It was urgent enough for the mayor to go to the ADN. Okay, with that, unless there's anything else, we will close this meeting and let the audit committee take this room. Can we get a motion to adjourn? We're adjourned.